let's talk about it.
Hello and welcome back to Thicc Radio, the podcast where we talk about gaining, feedism, and everything in their orbit. I'm James.
And I'm Tim. So let's get into it. Today we're welcoming to the show for the first time. Today we've got our friend Jorge.
Hello.
Hello.
It's very nice to be here, the podcast.
Well, thank you for being here. How are you today?
I'm fine. A little tired. Work was a little hard, but everything's fine.
Oh, bless you. Well, it is our favorite day of the week. It is a Tuesday, of course, and we're here today to talk a little bit about your experiences as a man of color in the feedist community. So, Jorge, are you ready to get into it today?
Yeah, sure.
Awesome stuff. Well, first off, I'd love to ask you, can you tell us a little bit about your journey within the gaining and feedist communities overall? Tell us about your journey when it comes to growth and encouragement and feeding. Tell us about all of that.
Well, I discovered this community like some years ago, to be honest. I was a teenage, like 15 or 14 years old, something like that. And my first contact with this gainer feedist thing, it was on YouTube some years ago. And I don't know how, or I found some videos about that, but old YouTubers about gaining and something. And I start like reading about the topic and so. And I was like, okay, this sounds interesting to me. And I don't know, but I was like, I told you, pretty young, and say, okay, but that's all. And some years passed, and when I was like, it's high school, I think, yeah, like 18 years, 17 years old, I was like, I don't know, like I remember about the topic and things in my life, like, okay, then let's try this again, or more like, no, I don't know, like a good way, like, okay, I'm gonna investigate about this and what I like and what I don't like. And I start like doing, not actually gaining, but like bloating and something like that, and more like an admire, like, yeah. And my first social was Grommr, because in the videos they say something like, oh, this is my page and da da da. So I investigated and say like, okay, I can start here. And well, the years pass and I get more into this. And I don't know, I have met a lot of people in socials and a little bit in person. I don't know.
Well, I can definitely identify with how you came into the community. I didn't discover it on YouTube because I'm older than YouTube, but I discovered it through the old Belly Builders website, like back when it was like the blue background and everything. But I sort of took my first steps into it as an admirer, and I did bloating in the beginning as well, because it was kind of like it felt back then like if you didn't do something to grab people's attention, they weren't going to notice you at all. And I was like, well, I can't put on any weight because I was only like 21 at the time, and I like my metabolism was like crazy fast, and I was like 145 pounds. So I was like, I'll just bloat, that'll get me a little, at least my foot in the door. And so like, yeah, I completely identify with how you began your journey in this community.
I agree 100%. It's wonderful to hear. I think what is a very typical experience for engagement. You discover it in this online capacity where you've got all of this content at your fingertips and your mind just gets blown wide open about the possibilities. And then you, as Tim was saying, you test the waters, you dip a toe, and then suddenly you're trying new things. And I love that, as you've said, over the years, you've had the chance to meet a number of different people. And just for the listeners, to clarify, you're based in Mexico, correct?
Yeah, correct.
So when you say you've met a number of people, is that mostly members of the Latin gaming community, specifically in Mexico, or have you had the opportunity to maybe travel to some different places to meet different people as well?
Okay, when I said meet people, I refer in person and in online. Online, there's a lot of USA people and from across the world, but meeting person, I have one people of Mexico, and in 2019 and 2020, before the pandemic hits, I had the opportunity to make an academic exchange to another university. So I have the opportunity I go to Germany and I met, German people. It was an amazing experience, to be honest, in person. So in person, German people and Mexican people.
That's really cool. I love hearing about people taking opportunities to do things internationally. I mean, it's funny, like living here in the UK, I've been here for 5 years now, and you do get very used to the whole, like, oh, I live here, this is my home. But there really is something to be said about moving to another country. It is a big thing, and I can only congratulate you for doing it for the time that you did, because I'm sure it was a really scary experience, but it's very rewarding. And as you say, meeting other people in these communities from all over the world, right? So, as we've covered, as a Mexican man, you are a man of color. I want to ask you, while you maybe in person have had predominantly, Mexican people to meet up with, as you say, online, you've had the opportunity to meet with people from all over the world. Have you had any negative experiences when it comes to being a person of color?
Well, in my case or in my experience, fortunately, I don't have like bad experiences about that. I mean, no bad. I have some comments, like for example, I have a YouTube channel about gaming and so. And sometimes I have comments like I don't believe you're Mexican, because there are stereotypes of like Mexican about being of color, but like a really, really dark skin. I mean, I'm not like a white or Caucasian, but there are a lot of differences in Mexico, like skin color type, but not like telling me like, oh, you are not Mexican. Like, I don't think, because it's pretty interesting. For example, when I was in Germany, there's some people about not in the community gaining or so, just normal random people like say, you're Mexican. Yeah, I'm Mexican. They say, why you are not like really short, or like you are more white than the movies show, or like that stereotype of the Mexican people. But besides that, I think, well, no, I mean only that kind of cases, but no, everything besides that is fine. Oh, well, at least in my situation.
So this was white people who were asking these questions and saying like, I don't think you're a real Mexican.
Yeah.
Yeah. See, this is sometimes it kind of like, sometimes it just drives me nuts that people have such a narrow view of everything, that like everything that they know about something is because they watch films or television. And especially over in the United States, I know Hollywood loves to push certain agendas and like loves to find, for the longest time it was like tokenism. There was always the one token, they wouldn't even say person of color, they would say the token ethnic character, and unfortunately this just proves that all of that toxic shit has led to people having these ridiculous assumptions about how the rest of the world is. And like, when I think of it's like take all of South America, for example, like people in Brazil, wildly different variances in skin tone, hair color, eye color, texture of hair. Like, it just drives me nuts. Sorry, that was a bit of a mini rant there.
it's an important conversation. I think we've talked about this before, in media representation, and some people will produce works. I think the Stonewall movie is a great example of this, and people will say things like, "Oh, historically, Marsha P. Johnson, a black trans drag queen, first person to throw a brick at Stonewall, and in this movie, it's a white gay man." And people, of course, grilled the director, going, "This is infactual. The fuck?" And then he was like, "Oh, well, it was just a part of this vision that I had." And it's like, your vision's stupid because we know that that's not what happened. And especially because historically we have a tendency to whitewash, we have a tendency to belittle and remove from the picture anyone who doesn't fit a very certain racial narrative. It's very concerning when people are very laissez-faire about being like, "Oh, it means nothing to do such a thing," when it actually means a lot. Representation is super duper important, and this ultimately comes down to why we wanted to do this episode and why we make such an effort to try to interview people from around the world, because we need to get as many different people from as many different backgrounds as possible sharing their experiences. So that's that on that. I'm curious to ask from your perspective, because I know you engage with the feedist community. Is that correct?
Yes.
So I'm curious to ask, do you think in the feedist community that there is the typical race issue where maybe people say inappropriate things, or maybe where people of color aren't treated as nicely as their white counterparts? Do you see that happening in the feedist community?
To be honest, I'm not really sure. I mean, I'm not always like looking for, I don't know, the well, how can I express it? I think no, but yes, like maybe not directly, but I see like a preference or like more support. Maybe not in a direct way, like, "Oh, I support you." It's like maybe when people upload some content, or I don't know, when they talking about Instagram and like in stories and more interactions, more likes, more followers, and everything that kind. But not like, "Oh, you're not white, so I don't follow you." Like, just like, "Okay, I don't follow him, yeah, or follow her, or everything." And yeah, well, something like that. No, well, in my case, like, I'm not always seeing like, oh, all the histories and all. I'm not always like in Instagram. So maybe there are some things that I can see, or yeah, or I don't know, think.
Yeah. I think that's totally fair. And to anyone listening who may be a person of color in the fetus community, if your experiences are different, we would encourage you, write into us at thiccradio@gmail.com. We'd love to have you on to share your experiences as well. So, of course, these are Jorge's experiences and observations, and I agree with what you're saying by my own observations. When you think about the people on Instagram and on a lot of websites that have the highest follower count, it does tend to be white people. When you think about the people who have the greatest level of engagement, it does tend to be white people. So I think that's a fair observation, that people of color will have not necessarily outright racism, although of course that may very well happen. And Tim, as a mixed race man, do you find that in the community, because okay, I found that when I don't open my mouth late at night after the club on my way home in an Uber, I'm a straight dude. And so a man driving Uber might think it's appropriate to catcall women and make inappropriate comments about women and his beliefs on misogyny and sexism and things of that nature.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if for you, because people assume you to be white, as a mixed race man, do you have that experience where maybe members of the community will maybe sidle up to you and make inappropriate racialized remarks about people?
Not so far, not so far, but um, I don't really get that. I don't really get anyone within the community bringing up my race or even asking me most of the time, you know. But now outside of the community, I experience it all the time. Just in my everyday civilian life, I get people who make assumptions about me, and it's kind of funny. It's funny, but not funny. Like depending on the month of the year, people make different assumptions. So if it's February, people think I'm usually white with like something thrown in there like Italian. You know, they're like, oh, he's a little olive toned, maybe he's Italian. If it's August, I will very often get called Puerto Rican or Mexican or somewhere from the Caribbean or somewhere from South America. Nobody ever guesses it correctly. But within the community, I can happily say that no one has brought that up to me yet, and I haven't experienced any racism personally from anyone.
Well, fingers crossed that that is a trend that continues. Um, and I mean, to that point, because you've been a part of the community for a while, do you feel like, and I'll ask this as well of you in a moment, Jorge, do you feel like the conversation around race in the gainer community, Tim, has improved over time?
Well, that's kind of tricky because as much as the conversation has been happening since lockdown, since George Floyd, since Black Lives Matter, I mean, like when it first went down, like beginning of 2020, and all this stuff started happening, the pandemic and George Floyd and everything. The discourse on like Grommr and Twitter was fairly contentious. There was a lot of calling people out left and right about their behavior and what they were saying. But I still will go onto Grommr and I will come across a profile where someone will very intently in their description say, I'm into white guys that are bearish, or and in some cases you come across profiles where they're specifically looking for someone for as for like a person of color to be with, but the way that they phrase it really makes it sound like they're fetishizing the fact that they are a person of color as opposed to just a personal preference. So I don't know if it's improving, because I don't know if people are getting the hint that like you gotta quit doing this shit.
So, Jorge, to put the question to you, do you feel like that kind of racialized situation, that conversation, do you think that's improving in the feedist community?
I think, well, between yes and no, I will say yes. But I know, for example, like from pandemic through these days, for example, I follow or I see, for example, in Instagram, more color people with new accounts and everything, and I made more friends because they are now in socials. So in that topic about not only white people in the social medias or Instagram or Grommr, I think yeah, we have improved. And like Tim said some minutes ago, like when the movements about black people and everything, and you see some, and you like see, I don't know, like right now this year or something. I don't know.
I think what you're saying, aligns with my own observations, that it, I think in some ways things are improving in that people are more aware. People are maybe in some regards being more considerate and being more, you know, less presumptive in a way, which probably is a good thing. Um, but I think much like all forms of social justice, it's always a vigilant conversation. There'll always be ebbs and flows and changes and things of that nature. But I always find it interesting to compare how maybe the feedist community might be doing versus the gaining community, where there are parallels and where there's differences.
So, Jorge, there is something that I'm curious about personally. When you were in Germany and you were talking about how people would say to you, I don't think that you're a real Mexican because your skin isn't dark enough. This brings up a pretty controversial thing, colorism, which happens a lot within communities of color. There can be a certain idea of what the beauty standard is supposed to be, even within communities of color. And I was wondering, does that happen to you in Mexico? Like, is there a sort of unspoken thing about colorism in your native country? Like, do Mexicans of a lighter skin tone manage to get a little bit further in society than those that are of a darker tone?
Okay, sadly, yes. The best question is yes, because I mean, well, Mexico was conquered by Spain some lot of years ago, centuries. So there are all communities here from Spain, France, I don't know, more countries. So well, through the years, well, the people mix it. So yeah, there are lighter and darker skin tones people. So well, at least here the idea of a successful person or more reliable person, it's not really good. But with a lighter skinner, you have like some advantage in everything, like finding a work, or even just talk to people asking for the hour in the street or so. And there are people like it doesn't matter, but there are another ones like no, I don't talk to you, yeah, it happens here. And yeah,
Yeah, well, then I
um,
guess it happens all over the world.
yeah, indeed.
I really appreciate you sharing that perspective. And again, I think it's important to remember that what we share here on the podcast are personal experiences and observations. And again, if anyone listening has observed anything different or experienced anything different, we encourage you, reach out to us at thiccradio@gmail.com. We can have a conversation. But Jorge is here to discuss his experiences, and that's what matters most. So, talking more a little bit about gaining itself, I think we talked about this once before on our BLM episode. Because we tend to celebrate Caucasian gainers so much, there's an expectation about how bodies will look as they get bigger. And while everybody is different and no shape is a guarantee, typically speaking, people of color will be a little bit more shapely in different ways on average comparative to everyone else. So, for example, in my observations, people who are African descent, people who are Latino descent tend to have very big hips, very big butts, broader shoulders more naturally. Whereas I think the white observation is we tend to be very like, I think the term is apple shaped, very
Yes.
kind of a triangle, but a lot of belly, and there's usually not a butt, at least naturally speaking, right? You have to do some squats to earn that part. But when we discussed this in the BLM episode, the conversation was around how as people grow, you realize that the body you grow into looks a little bit different from the bodies that get celebrated. And I wanted to ask you, is that an experience that you've had personally? Like, do you find that as you've grown a little bit, that your body doesn't look the way that you think it should because it doesn't marry up to Caucasian bodies?
Well, it's pretty curious because I have seen, like you said, like Latin type like body shapes. And when I wrote something, I mean, when like my body shape, I see like, okay, I could see like him or like this type of body. And sometimes there is parts like, okay, I don't know, I don't see like, how can I say, my legs are growing different, or I see some bodies that I think I could grow like that. And it's pretty funny because I see like, I mean, specifically like Mexican bodies about gainers. And to be honest, I don't represent myself, like I don't see like, oh, I could be like that, because there are but everyone, like you say, grow different, and because genetics, habits, and food, everything, the context where you live, and so. But yeah, I mean, I have like people like I saw and I see like, okay, yeah, maybe my body will grow like that. Yeah, but I mean, like I said, it's pretty curious because I don't identify like the Mexican stereotype, about the body growth.
Thank you for sharing that. I want to ask you something here. Is there a piece of advice you would want to give to members of your local community? People who are Latine, young, up and coming, maybe people who are gay gayners, maybe people who are straight feedists, but people who look like you. Is there a piece of advice you'd like to share when it comes to the process of gaining and feedism?
Yeah. I mean, I have like, well, yeah, because when I was entered to this community and I don't know, growing and everything, I would really like to have someone or someone or see some, like you say, advices, or I don't know, or someone who told me their experiences.
Mm.
And yeah, the first thing is, if you have the curiosity, or like, oh, what will happen if I can something, or I can imagine me like with, I don't know, 10 more pounds or everything. Try it, like, you don't know if you will like it if you don't try it first. Um, Everything with measure, like, for example, in my case, I was a runner, so I used to do a lot of exercise. So for me, it was like complicated to, okay, I like this, but because everything, friends, family, even the economy, like gaining is expensive. Well, at least here in Mexico, it's not like really, really easy, I mean, in that context. So step by step, like, okay, I'm gonna put a goal like, I want to be 100 pounds, like in 1 year, because in my context it's pretty hard, even for me, for my metabolism and everything. So I put like little goals, like, okay, maybe first 5 hours, and I see how many time I get there, or something like that. So try it and put, well, in my case, small goals, like, and you see like, okay, you look at your mirror and, okay, I like what I'm seeing, or I don't feel comfortable, or, okay, maybe I can do this, but I still want to do some activities. So the thing is, like, you feel comfortable what you are doing.
No, I think all of that is wonderful. And this ties into themes we've talked about how many times before, Tim? Themes about mentorship, themes about community and passing on the information to the next generation. It's something that, in a way, it's nice to know that it's not just happening in English speaking countries, but it speaks to a real need, not just with our culture, but with many cultures around the world. We need more connectivity and more willingness to share experiences, And I think absolutely nail on the head, when it comes to the process of gaining weight, to give yourself time and grace. I think all of that is very, very important. And I appreciate hearing it from you, because it's nice to know that I think more people than we maybe give credit for are on the same page, right, when it comes to these conversations. I think that's wonderful. I want to ask here as well, is there an aspect of your experiences that we haven't touched on so far that you'd love to tell the listeners about?
Mm, well, this is a small topic, but uh, for me, for example, when I was gaining, it was hard. Well, it's not like a big deal, but when you grow or something like that, you need to throw some clothes and buy new ones. For example, in my experience, it was a little hard because you see, like, for example, fashion, or I mean, I'm not like a fashionist or something like that, but I really like to look good, like, yeah, like look good even in general. So there was like clothes that, okay, this doesn't fit anymore, and it was pretty nice, or I really like this color or everything. I mean, I'm not like really big right now, but it's not that, well, here, at least in Mexico, it's not that easy to like beautiful or look good clothes in bigger size. Well, I really like to share this because maybe there are some Mexican gainers, or I don't know, Latin gainers, like, oh, they feel insecure about that. Because I already talked with some Latin people in the gaming community, video community. They talk to me or say like, oh, but I'm worried about my clothes and everything, because, well, it's, you need to buy a new one, and final is money you need to spend, or yeah. hmm So, well, it's maybe for someone it's not a big deal, like, it doesn't matter. But like I told you, in my case, it was like kind of shock, like, okay, I need to, okay, yeah, I change some clothes, and yeah.
Thank you for sharing. I really appreciate that. Tim, is there an aspect to the PoC experience that we haven't touched on yet that you'd like to ask Jorge about?
No, I think we're good. I think that he's really given us a great view of how things are for him in his particular experience. And I feel like this is a conversation that, we could stretch over so many episodes, and we can always come back to this topic all the time because it's always going to be a relevant issue.
100%. And something I've said many times during this episode, and I'll say again, if your experiences are different to Jorge's, or if your views are different to Jorge's, we would like to encourage you to email us at thiccradio@gmail.com, and we'll have you on the show to share. Because I think this is such an important conversation, and much like you say, Tim, a conversation we'll have again and again, because we need to keep having it. Because we need to see more fantastic Mexican gainers like Jorge coming up, and we need to explore the feedist community more. We need to grant space and conversation to so many more wonderful people. And so I think with that, Jorge, I want to say thank you so much for your time today as we close out this episode. Is there any final thoughts you'd like to share with the listeners?
Well, I'm something I could say is like, well, first, thanks for the invitation, and don't be afraid to look, to investigate, or to try something. I mean, in general, but in this case, the video gaming community, and take your time, like everything. You put your times and your personal goals and follow, or like doing it, because there will be a lot of people, like, they have some expectations, like, oh, why you don't gain so fast, or why you don't do that, or do this, or like standards for other people. So take your time and enjoy the process.
Well, Jorge, thank you again. Now, where can our listeners find you online? What are your social media handles?
Okay, I have my Instagram. On my profile, I have a link to all my social medias, like YouTube, X, Twitter, Grommr, and more. And my Instagram is chubbyboy9797.
Beautiful. Well, that brings us to the end of another week here on Thicc Radio. Please remember to like and subscribe, rate us 5 stars, and leave us a good review. If you liked this episode, the podcast, or just us in general, please share it with your friends and encourage them to tune in. You can find me on Instagram and BlueSky at stannnum.
And you can find me on Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and TikTok at thiccmouse. You can also look us up on Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok at Thicc Radio, or our website, podpage.com/Thicc Radio. If you want to submit a voice note or become a financial supporter of the show, you can find the links in the show notes. And you can also write to us at thiccradio@gmail.com. So until next time, bye, Fats.
Bye, Fats.
Oh, bye, Fats.
Let's talk about it.
Thicc Radio is a Patreon and Anchor app podcast produced by stannnum and Thicc.
Mixed and mastered by stannnum.
Our artwork is provided by Lokitu.
Our theme song is provided by Spotify Cream.